Before I introduce Bobby Chaisson, Bobby, we've scoured the internet and we found a video.
Uh-oh.
So, Brian, you found it. Let's roll it.
Oh my God! Bees! Millions of bees! Air Search 2-8 to base. Bees! Millions of bees!
Bees.
Yes, they're all around me now. All over the canopy, trying to get in.
Well, get above them, man. Take it up.
I can't, sir. I am losing power.
We dug into the archives for that one, didn't we? Nice job, Kurt. Yeah, they were swarming, though, in Times Square, similar to that 1978 film, The Swarm. More than 40,000 bees descended upon a hot dog stand. This was Tuesday, middle of New York City. Look at them there. It was just as frightening. It's on that umbrella there. Shut down the street, by the way. They ended up being vacuumed out of there. They were taken to a new home in Long Island.
The colony has outgrown wherever they're living. So they, just like we do, we're looking for a new home. So about half the colonies and the queen will leave, and they've got to group back up together. So that's what they're doing there, landing on the umbrella. They're kind of grouping there until they can get everybody together and then decide where they're going to go from there to a new home. Just so happens those guys were able to get them and get them into a new bee box.
And so they use the vacuum there. Is that the norm for something like a situation like that?
For a situation like that where they're all spread out over the top of the umbrella, definitely a vacuum works really easy. They've got vacuums that are specifically designed just to vacuum up bees like that. So it works really well. A lot of times in our areas, they'll land on a branch and something like that, and they'll kind of group up in a ball, so to speak, and you can call a beekeeper and shake them off in a box and take them home.
And is that unusual? For, again, middle of a city like that? You get
Not at all.
No.
Not at all. You'd be really surprised how many beekeepers there are in a metropolitan area, especially here in Atlanta. You know, there's several hundred inside the perimeter, and that's not counting all what we call feral colonies of bees that are just living out in houses or trees or all kinds of structures. So there's quite a few around.
Tell us about your job. My guess is you get stung a few times a day?
Just a few times. It's kind of a regular
How'd you get into
occurrence. Actually, I grew up in the house, and it had bees in the wall of the house, so I always had an interest in it. Read a little bit, studied some, and managed to get a couple of colonies to start out with, and 2 turned into 4, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, nice. Ever fearful when you come upon a scene and a swarm and a hive, and are you all like, okay?
No, bees are actually so gentle. It's really amazing how gentle honeybees are. I think everybody equates getting stung to a wasp or a yellow jacket or something like that. Honeybees, they're wanting to make honey and hang out.
Okay.
The bees that we keep around here are super gentle and super great.
Thanks for coming on. Bobby
Absolutely.
Chaisson, our bee expert, helping us kind of better understanding what went on there in Times Square.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Good
Thanks for having
Thanks so
me.
much.
Well, Bobby, what kind of experience was that?
Oh, it was amazing. You know, of course, that was an interview down in Atlanta, and it's always fun to be able to just talk to folks about bees and explain experiences and what's going on with them. They're just such a fascinating little insect, and it's just great to talk and educate people about them.
What was that experience like doing it there at HLN?
Oh, wow. I mean, it was really neat. It was interesting to me to be able to see, you know, behind the scenes and how all that kind of stuff gets put together, and then just to be on the TV and be nationally syndicated. I had folks calling me from all over the country that know me and were like, "Oh man, I saw you on TV." So it was a lot of fun to be able to, you know, get that information out and an accurate information out to folks.
Sure. And you were on ABC too, if I'm correct.
Oh God, I've been kind of several different places. It's hard to keep up with them now, but yeah, I've been interviewed several different ways.
Well, I want to introduce Bobby to our audience here. He has quite a resume. I've known him for 7 or 8 years, and he is a master beekeeper. He has also achieved the Beekeeper of the Year for the state of Georgia. And Bobby also serves as the director of the Georgia Beekeepers Association and is also the president of the Tri-County Beekeepers Association. So, Bobby, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me, Ray. I appreciate it.
Well, Bobby, tell me a little bit about your business, Georgia Bee Removal.
So Georgia Bee Removal is probably one of the oldest and most established bee removal companies in the state. We travel pretty much all of the Southeast. I think the only state that we haven't been to is Florida around us. But we provide bee removal services for residential and commercial structures and relocate the bees alive and relocate them back into a proper beehive. and then we donate them out to different clubs after a year or so of keeping them. So we're been around for quite a while and provide a great service for folks that have houses and businesses that want to keep the bees alive and keep them healthy.
Now, Bill Owens is still owns Georgia Bee Removal.
Absolutely.
Well, folks, this is where I got started, was with Bill Owens teaching a class at a technical school.
Mhm.
And he had about 8 weeks of teaching. And that's where I got the stinger, is
Absolutely.
I wanted to become a beekeeper. At first, I was a little withdrawn, and the more he talked, the more I said, "Hey, this is interesting." So tell Bill I said hello.
I
All righty.
definitely will.
Well, tell us a little bit now, Bobby, about the removal of bees from structures. How do you guys do that? And how? Tell us the step by step on that.
Well, step by step. So, I think one of the biggest things, and the first step, of course, is a kind of a consultation with a customer, so to speak. I've got a fantastic lady in the office that takes our phone calls and really knows all the questions to ask to establish whether it is honeybees or not. So we kind of try to figure out where they're located in the house and get them on the schedule, and we go out there. And the day that I'm there is the day that they're actually going to get removed from the house.
So you go from consultation into let's get the job done once the homeowner goes through that step by step process of what you're going to do.
Absolutely. Pat at the office does a great job explaining the whole process and
Mhm.
what we're going to do. I think with us, we have been around so long and we've done so many bee removals. I mean, personally, I've done over 2,000 live bee removals from structures. So,
Over how many years would that be, Bobby?
God, probably 8 or 9 now. So
Wow.
I typically do about 150 or 200 removals a year.
And when does that season typically start for you, where you hear the phones starting to ring?
Depending on the weather in our area, typically we'll start mid to late February. March will get picked up really good, but April, May, and June are just as many as we can get to.
Well, great. So you go from the consultation
Mhm.
and getting the job done,
Sure.
and now getting the job done. What kind of things have you run into with getting it done?
Oh, I have run into everything from brand new colonies that have just moved in that
Mm.
might take you 45 minutes to an hour to remove, to one of the largest ones I've ever removed was about 25 feet long
Oh
in the
wow.
ceiling of somebody's dining room. Yeah, that they had thought they'd only been there for a few months, and when we showed up,
Mm.
they were quite large. Took us about half a day to even get everything out and get it all squared away. It was rather large, but if you can imagine it with bees, I've probably seen it. They've been everywhere in structures and commercial buildings and, everywhere that you could possibly think.
Now we have some pictures that you brought,
Certainly.
and Brian, why don't we throw up one of the pictures here for Bobby to talk about?
Yeah, right. So this is a basic colony that has moved in basically in the top of a bay window, which is not terribly uncommon, but not a really common spot. And the interesting part about this, most of the time when they move into a bay window, they'll be on the edges or beside the house.
Mhm.
But this colony decided to go in between the shingles and the gutter and went into the center of the bay window. So it's a kind of a normal bee removal
Mhm.
for us. We come out there, we'll take the shingles off of the roof, pull up the plywood, and as you can see, the bees are right there. Vacuum all the bees up, remove the honeycomb, and then we fill the space back in with some new insulation, put everything back together, put the shingles back down. You never even know we were there.
Not many extraction companies do the repair work afterwards. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of the few things that does set us apart from a lot of people. There are a few that will put everything back together, but we pride ourselves on the fact that once we are done, basically, the only thing, if they have to, that a customer will have to do is some minor painting.
Mhm.
And that also allows us to give the customer a guarantee that once we've done the bee removal, we can guarantee because we put it back together and we can ensure the bees can't get back in there. So we give them a 5-year guarantee that the bees won't come back to that same spot that we removed them from.
Now, I get this question a lot, so I'm gonna let the expert answer. I know what the answer is, but when you get in there, with all the bees flying around and everything, you got to get the queen. Am I
Sure.
correct?
It is pretty important to find her.
Mhm.
It's not, depending on the time of the year, it's not complete death
Mhm.
to the colony because, as you know, through beekeeping practices, we can do some stuff once we get them back to the bee yard so they can raise another queen. But by the way that we do the bee removals, about 90% of the time I am able to put my eyes on the queen and catch her. A lot of the other times I end up inadvertently vacuuming her up, but
Yes.
normally we do find her, and it is obviously for the survival of the colony best to find the queen while you're doing the removal. And after you do a lot of them, it becomes pretty easy to find her.
Very good. Brian, let's go to the next slide.
So, Ray, this one is actually a colony that has moved into the floor of a house. This was kind of interesting because this was kind of an upstairs stowed away closet.
A second floor then.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. So basically, they were between the first and second floor, which is very common, especially here in Georgia, because there's no insulation between the floors. And we get a call all the time: bees are in my wall. Oh my goodness, bees are in the wall. And I would say almost 100% of the time that they're actually between the floors because it's a wide open space. And it surprisingly is almost the same size as a regular beehive. But these were going in kind of at a corner of a house and were accessing the space between the two floors
Sure.
by a little bitty hole. And it literally takes a hole about the size of a pencil for the bees to get into. And once they move in, they do exactly what you see. They'll build their comb in there and just make their house.
So when we're looking at joists that are going across and
Mhm.
those stabilizers,
Yep.
if they weren't cut correctly and squared, they're going to have a gap.
Correct.
And that's where the bees can expand in months and years to come. Am I correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And I see that more commonly now,
Mm,
where you have engineered trusses,
yes.
where typically we don't see it with like standard lumber, standard 1x10s, 1x12 floor joists.
Hmm.
Where I see that commonly, where they continue past that purling board, is those engineered trusses. They look like I-beams made out of wood,
Yes.
and that always leaves a space for bees to go around it. And I've seen them get pretty big, but majority of the time they're 3 or 4 feet long, and that's about all the bees can manage.
So with this one here, did you go up through the ceiling or down through the floor to this
So
colony?
that's actually a good common question that we always get is, how to
Mm.
get to them. And this one we actually went down through from above them. So we went through the floor.
Mm.
And a couple of reasons for that is with this particular one, because it was in a closet, we could go in there in that closet and cut it, the subfloor, so to
Yes.
speak, right on top of the floor joist, pull that piece of wood up. Of course, it's in a closet. Nobody's ever going to see it again. But also, if it had it been out in a room where there was carpet, we could pull the carpet back, do the same thing. Then when we're done and we put the carpet back down, you never see it. If we were to go through the ceiling, of course, the homeowner would have to sand and repaint the ceiling. So you would see that.
Yes.
So we try to go through the floor if we're able to.
Mhm. Very good. Let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, so this one is pretty interesting. These folks at this house had an outdoor porch,
Mm.
and they had decided to enclose the bottom of it, which of course is just like a ceiling.
Now,
and floor.
how far off the ground was that?
I want to say this was about 8 or 10 feet off the ground,
Okay.
so within
All right.
relative ladder distance.
Okay.
It wasn't too terribly high, but they had put plywood under the porch and did a little bit of insulation,
Mhm.
but still left a big void there. Well, the bees, of course, as ingenuity as they are, found the
Mhm.
hole and moved up in there. These bees had probably been there for a couple of months,
Mm.
but really nice big colony. This thing was probably the size of 2 or 3 basketballs. But we were able to go in there, take the plywood off the bottom of the porch, and it was relatively easy to access
Mm.
them. Stand there and just remove the pieces of comb as we went through it. But really typical kind of bee removal that we see.
Let's go to the next slide. Bobby, tell us a little bit about this one. This is pretty interesting.
Yeah, so this is probably, I would say, the second most common place that we find
Mhm.
bees. This is actually the soffit or the overhang of the house.
Mhm.
And there again, we get calls all the time where they're going in right at the top edge of the soffit where it meets the house,
Mm.
and people automatically think the bees are in the wall. And they're typically not. They're in this overhang, because that overhang is there to let air circulate around the house so they don't put insulation in it. So there again, just like your floor joist, it's just a big wide open space. Now, granted, it's only about 3 or 4 inches tall,
Mhm.
but it can be 18 or 20 feet long. So these bees had moved in right beside the brick and the siding there, and just started down the soffit and started building, and very nice colony, very well built.
Well, I have a question on this video, or not video, this picture is they have a little bit of a wave to the comb.
Certainly.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the comb that you see most often. Is it straight or is it wavy? You know, tell us a little bit what you normally see on something like that there.
So it's pretty interesting. In most of the time, it is built straight. You know,
Mm.
every now and then there'll be something in the way. Like a lot of times you'll have pipes or electrical lines, or I've even found dead squirrels and mice
Oh,
and
wow.
stuff, and they will build right around it that will give a wave to,
Mhm.
the first piece of comb.
Mhm.
And then of course it's like farming. If you get a wave in the first one, you get a
Yep.
wave in every one past that. But generally speaking, they do build fairly straight
Mhm.
comb. And then sometimes it's across the joist, sometimes it's the length of them. It
Mhm.
just totally depends. That might be a good research to figure out what causes them to build in which direction. So
I've even seen them look like a brain of sorts, where they're round. And I don't know what caused that roundedness to begin with, but you
exactly.
look at it and you go, wow, how do they do what they do?
Yeah, it really is fascinating when you look at that kind of stuff. I've even had pieces of comb in the shape of Florida.
Mhm.
It's crazy the shapes and
Mhm.
directions they will build stuff. And I've had them build in one direction for half of the comb, and then the other half of the comb is built in the other direction. It's just kind of no rhyme or reason as to what they're doing, but they're a whole lot smarter than we are.
Mm.
They know what they need. So
Well, you're on call right now. Am I correct?
absolutely
Okay.
all the time.
I've got a video from my Uncle Pete.
So, Ray, that's kind of like that very first picture that we talked about that I gave to you. Um, that's a typical bay window. And just like where you saw that bee going in right there at the corner of the metal, with that situation, I can almost guarantee you without looking at it with a thermal camera that they're in the top of that bay window. Now, some of the challenges you're going to have with it is that it is a metal top roof.
Mm.
When it's sheet metal like that, it's a little more challenging. Typically, I like to go from the inside of the house to
Yes.
get to them. So there are some sheet metals you can take off, but
Mhm.
generally I don't like to because it's a little more challenging to do. So there's some other avenues you can get to them.
Because if you bend that metal, you can't bend it back to where it used to
Exactly.
be
Yep,
on that there.
exactly.
Okay. Well,
So
very good. Now we have another video on the inside of the
Let me see
house
if I can
of
do.
of
Is that
this
good?
Yeah,
neighbor's
yeah, that
house,
does. That
and
helps.
you'll see that there's a stain
Here,
mark.
give it
sure.
So
12,
take a
15
look at it and
seconds.
tell us what you're thinking.
Yeah, so what that looks like is possibly what's going on is the colony that was living there has died
Mhm.
off for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And unmanaged colonies face so many challenges now with honeybees, with pests and diseases that they have to deal with. It's not uncommon for an unmanaged colony in a house to die off on its
Mm.
own. Well, then if there's honey and that kind of stuff left there, we do have a lot of pests that will move in and start eating on that honeycomb,
Mm.
which will cause the comb to break apart, of course, fall onto the sheetrock and start leaking through. So it's not uncommon in a colony that has died on its own to see stains like that. So it's not necessarily a water leak in the roof, but it's the possibility. And of course, you don't know until you open up the
Yes.
ceiling and see
Mhm.
if it's in fact honey on the ceiling. But just by the amount of traffic that's on the outside of the house in that first video,
Mm.
I would lean towards it's probably a colony that has died out, and that's what they're starting to see is some staining from
Mm.
the left honeycomb in there.
So if you were doing this house call, and would you bring out a thermal meter or a
Absolutely.
scope and see what's going on?
One of the best tools that we have
Mm.
gotten in this business, of course, is FLIR technology or infrared
Yes.
technology for us. I've actually got 4 different cameras, a couple that hook to my phone and then a handheld device as well But bees, by the nature of bees, generate enough heat that we
Mhm.
can see the temperature difference inside of a house. So that is absolutely one of the very first steps I take when I show up to somebody's
Mhm.
house. I'll break out that thermal camera and I can
Yeah.
pinpoint exactly where the bees are and if there's bees in there at all. So it makes it a lot easier to make that determination of where they are and if they're there for sure and where we need to go or which direction we need to remove them from.
Is there a thermal sensor that you would recommend for the layperson like myself to put up there and see where the bees are and are not?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's lots of them out there on the market. They're the one that I use, not promoting one company over
Mhm.
another, but
Mhm.
FLIR or
Sure.
FLIR is the industry leader in the technology,
Mhm.
and they make a little camera that you can attach to your phone, and it runs off of an app on your phone. It costs a couple of $100,
Wow.
and yeah, and I actually recommend them for beekeepers to do hive inspections
Mm.
with.
Mhm.
Late in the fall, early in the springtime, where you don't want to necessarily open up a colony, you can use a FLIR camera. So they're out there. You don't have to spend a ton of money on them, but the technology is well worth the investment.
Well, we're gonna have to have you back in January
Certainly.
when there's nothing going on and have you come out with your FLIR
Absolutely.
and let's see what hives are really jam-packed full of bees and which ones probably aren't going to make it because they're so small of a colony.
Absolutely.
Now, Bobby, tell us a little bit about now you've gotten the bees out of the house and what do you do with them at that point?
So that's the common question is where are these going to go? What are you going to do with
Mhm.
these bees? And we've got 8 different bee yards scattered all the way from the North Georgia mountains down to halfway down the state. But generally, the majority of them, I take them back home. I've got a
Mhm.
pretty big apiary at the house, and we get them back into a beehive. Just regular
Mhm.
managed beehive. Get them situated, get them started back over, feed them if we need to, treat them for mites, that kind of stuff if we need to, and just get them settled in, and then we donate them out. There's 48 clubs across the state, and we commonly get requests from them to donate them to them. So it's kind of our way of giving back to the bee community.
One question that comes to mind, you take these combs out of whatever structure
Mhm.
and it's got brood. Do you try to save that brood or are you just going to get the bees shook off into a box and take them? How do you play that as a beekeeper?
So that's a great question, and it really depends on the time of the year.
Mm,
If it's early spring up till about June or so, I don't really reuse the comb just
yes.
because there's enough resources out, as far as nectar and stuff,
Hmm.
so bees can rebuild fresh, clean comb in a hive.
Hmm.
I always have a worry and a thought in the back of my head, not that they've done it, but there's the potential that a homeowner or a pest control company or somebody like that has sprayed something on those
Mm,
bees before they called us. So I always have that concern of having something like
hmm.
that in the wax. So
Hmm.
if I can not reuse it, I
Hmm.
don't. Um, but if we get later in the season when they don't have as much resources to rebuild comb, I can rubber band it back into regular frames and the bees will reuse it.
Okay, so you will cut out the comb to fit into a frame, either a medium or a deep,
Exactly.
probably mostly mediums.
Actually, I use pretty much all of my stuff as deep just
Mhm.
because it's easier for
Yeah,
me and in my operation, it's a lot easier.
and then you just put rubber bands, 2 or 3 or 4 rubber
Oh,
bands on it?
it just depends. Sometimes I get one
Mhm.
piece of comb that fits the entire frame, and then
Sure.
sometimes you might make it up with 4 or 5 pieces.
Mhm.
So, but typically you just kind of gauge and see. But 4 or 5 rubber bands generally will hold everything in, and it's really fascinating because you can rubber band a piece of comb into a frame and put it with the bees,
Mhm.
and come back the very next day, and they will already have attached that to the
Yes,
frames and start chewing the rubber bands
and
out.
that was because you were feeding them, during that time?
That or that there's enough nectar out there that they can get it
Yes.
reestablished and reattached.
Well, very good. Bobby, thanks for coming by today, and best of luck with this business that you love,
Oh, I do.
and take care, my friend.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Ray. I enjoyed it.